Okay, here's a shocker. Clear illustration of the shenanigans that took place after changes were made on the whim ahead of the 2020 elections under the guise of a COVID response. This week, Rasmussen Reports and the Heartland Institute released the results of a new poll that indicated that 1 out of every 5 voters who submitted a mail-in ballot during the 2020 election admitted to committing fraudulent activity in violation of federal law. This includes things like filling out a ballot for a friend or a family member, filling out a ballot for someone else. It included things like submitting a ballot for a state that these people no longer lived in. Now, Democrats claim that they want to make it easier for everyone to vote, but this type of stuff just makes it much easier for anyone to cheat. And the question is, are we going to see more of this in the upcoming election? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Hans von Spakovsky, manager of the Heritage Foundation's Election Law Reform Initiative and author of Our Broken Elections, How the Left Changed the Way You Vote. Hans also served 2 years as a member of the Federal Elections Commission and was also appointed to the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity back in 2017. Hans, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. First of all, I think this poll, for most all of us, is just a shock. But is it surprising to someone like you who's been following this? Are you surprised?
No, I'm not, because, absentee ballots are the most insecure way of voting because they're the only ballots that are voted outside the supervision of election officials and outside the observation of poll watchers. So, frankly, it's pretty easy for fraud to be committed. And for most states, most states have almost no security measures in place to make sure that the person who is the registered voter is actually filling in and sending in the absentee ballot. So no, I can't say I'm surprised by this. It's unfortunate, but it's no surprise.
It is absolutely shocking. I tell you, when you consider this, it's somewhere we had the most people vote by mail-in ballots this time than we've ever had by far. Something like 43% of the voters in 2020 cast their vote by a mail-in ballot. I mean, that is an enormous amount of people, over 66 million votes out of a little over 150 million. I mean, that's just startling. So what we are talking, if 1 out of 5 of them admits that they were involved in some sort of fraudulent behavior, we are talking very serious issues here, aren't we?
We are. We're talking about very large numbers. And while people always talk about the presidential race, remember, when we go in on Election Day, we're voting on very long ballots. I mean, in a presidential election year, you're also going to be voting for members of Congress, state legislatures, local city councils, county commission races. And most of those races are won by a very small margin of votes. And it doesn't take a lot of fraud to change an outcome in a race like that.
Yeah, and I didn't mention this going into it, just mentioning a couple of things off the top of my head that come with some of the ways that some of these people admitted that they engaged in fraudulent behavior, be it voting for someone else or voting from a different state. But many of them were actually paid to do this as well. What kind of numbers of people are we talking about, and who in the world is paying them? Do we have any idea?
We don't know how big that problem is, but we know it's a problem. You may have seen that just within the last month, an investigation was opened up in I think it's Springfield, Massachusetts, after an election official heard someone who came into a polling place say, "Oh, I need that I voted sticker in order to get paid." And they actually have video from a camera outside the polling place showing a man who had driven up in a black SUV actually paying off voters as they came out. So unfortunately, again, we have a long history of that kind of thing. And if you check the Heritage election fraud database, we have a database of proven cases of fraud. We're about to go over 1,500 documented cases, and unfortunately, you'll find many cases in there where people were bribed to vote a particular way.
That's just unbelievable. And all of this comes in the midst of an environment in which the left continually spouts off their talking points about there was no evidence of widespread election fraud. Are they just trying to cover up, or are they incapable of connecting the dots? What do you think is behind all of this? I know you've taken a lot of hits with it. I have as well. What's behind this constant drumbeat of no evidence?
Well, they used to say there was no evidence of fraud at all. Now they use the term there's no widespread fraud. Well, my question to that is, well, how widespread does it need to be before you want to start taking steps to stop it? I think they push it because while there are cases of both Democrats and Republicans in our database engaging in fraud, the majority of the cases are Democrats. And in fact, sometimes it's Democrats stealing votes from other people in their own party. Again, just within the last month, an election was overturned, this time in Connecticut, and it was in a primary election, Democratic primary election. So this happens like that all the time. By the way, keep in mind that the left has filed lawsuits in multiple states trying to throw out even the minimal security measures that are in place in some states. They are challenging, for example, signature comparison statutes. They are challenging states that require a witness on an absentee ballot. So even when states try to do something to make absentee ballots more secure, they're instantly challenged by the left, who doesn't want anything that will secure the election process.
Well, that's frightening. That is, I sat in so many hearings on the Oversight Committee as we were dealing with this, and they're pushing for H.R. 1, and COVID being the big excuse as to why all our election processes needed to be changed, and this is the outcome. And it not only has a potential of affecting outcomes of elections, but it also, the voters out there lose confidence in our system, which that is a whole nother enormous problem that we face. All right, let me keep pushing here, because you are the expert on all of this, not just mail-in voting. I mean, there's so many other issues. This is one of many as it relates to election integrity. Tell us some of the other big issues that need to be addressed.
Well, look, one of the other big issues was indicated by the Rasmussen poll that we were just discussing. Remember, part of the polling showed a large percentage of individuals admitting that they had voted in a state where they no longer live. So what that means is, as you know, we're a highly mobile society. People move a lot in this country, and it's fairly easy for someone to get registered to vote, and then when they move to another state, get registered in that new second state, but leave their registration in their old state and vote, for example, in person in one state and by absentee ballot in the other. That's another big problem. And for folks who don't think this happens, I would remind them that about 10 years ago, a Democratic congressional candidate in Maryland, her name was Wendy Rosen, she won the nomination, was going to challenge one of the lone Republicans in Maryland, until it was discovered that she was registered to vote in both Maryland and Florida and had been voting in both states illegally in multiple elections.
Wow. Wow. All right. The Heritage Foundation, I'm familiar with this, but maybe some of our viewers or listeners are not, but the Heritage Foundation has published an election integrity scorecard that rates the election laws and regulations of all the states and the District of Columbia But as it relates specifically to the security and integrity of the election process, tell us about that and what you're seeing across the country.
We came up with an objective scorecard that rates states on 47 different criteria. And it's everything from whether they require an ID to vote, both in person and with absentee ballots, to what steps do they take to maintain and clean up their voter rolls so that they are accurate and don't have people who are dead on them or people who have moved away. And then we compared every state to these 47 best practices. The best states in the country, probably no surprise to you, are mostly red states because they're actually willing to pass reforms. A perfect score is 100. No state in the country got 100. The highest scores were in the low 80s. Those are places like Georgia, Florida, Texas, Mississippi, and other states that have actually done a pretty good job with reforms. The worst states in the country, probably again, no surprise to anyone, are places like California and New York, which not only don't clean up their voter rolls, but they don't even require an ID to vote. So if you want to commit fraud in a state like that, very easy to do, and your chances of getting caught are minimal.
Wow. That's all right. So friends can find that information where?
If they go to heritage.org and look under election integrity, that's one of our issues, they'll pull up not only our scorecard, which gives a detailed analysis of every state, but also they can pull up our election fraud database. So if you're having an argument with someone and they say, oh, fraud doesn't happen, hey, you can pull up our database, pull up any state, and it will list the fraud cases that have been successfully prosecuted in that state.
A great resource there. All right, but one of the things that comes up to me a lot, Hans, is, you can have the best laws. Georgia has some good laws right now. They passed SB 202. They're making some great steps in the right direction. But at the end of the day, none of these laws account for very much if there's not some capacity to enforce the laws. How do we, as citizens, help ensure that our laws for election integrity are upheld and enforced?
Boy, that is a key question. And in fact, we took that into account when we put our scorecard together. And one of the things we score a state on is whether they have a law that allows any voter in a state to sue an election official to require them to abide by the law. In some states, voters don't have the ability to do that. Virginia is one of them. But we require that. If you want to get a good score with the Heritage Foundation's analysis, you'd better have a law that allows voters to sue election officials who are not complying with the law.
Absolutely. And it just looks like, and I know our time's getting away from us here, but it looks like we are entering into a phase where every election cycle there's going to be some election variant of COVID that raises its head. And we're seeing what's happening now in China and different places. And you just walk around town, people are wearing masks all over again. This is a time for us to take seriously election integrity. So once again, Hans, give us where people can go to find out where their particular states are on the scorecard and how they can stay on top of this issue.
Go to heritage.org, heritage.org, click on issues, and there you'll find election integrity. And if you click on that, you'll pull up not only all the articles and papers we've written about this, but both our scorecard and our election fraud database.
Thank you so much, Hans von Spakovsky. We appreciate so much the incredible work that you do and for the Heritage Foundation as well. Merry Christmas to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and Merry Christmas to you and all your viewers, too.